Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the most recent episode of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. It was called Paris sera toujours Paris, which in French means Paris will always be Paris. As the episode starts, Daryl, Laurent, Isabel, and Sylvie arrive in a town from which they try to radio for further instructions on where to go with Laurent. But the radio man there seems to be a bit nuts and has apparently cannibalized the radio to make it so a bunch of walkers he's trussed up to the ceiling with instruments attached to them can produce music for him. He conducts his orchestra for Daryl and Isabel, much to their horror. And of course, the loud noise brings walkers out and towards the wagon they left out front. Daryl tells Isabel they're going to follow his plan now versus hers after they escape from these walkers, since hers wasn't working, and they head to Paris. They go over a bridge with Notre Dame in the distance, and of course, it all looked destroyed. And it's weird because I was just there between the 18th and the 21st of this month, and it was just so weird seeing these sites in the heart of the city where I just was that were all dilapidated. Really crazy. Anyway, they then go through Père Lachaise Cemetery, which oddly looked the same as when I was there, old and creepy, because that's just how it looks, where they see Jim Morrison's grave and spend a moment musing about him and the fact that he died in Paris, which Laurent assures Daryl won't happen to him. And of course, I was just at that grave days ago. So it was really just kind of weird. Anyway, there in the cemetery, they meet more survivors and discover that their idea of a radio at the camp where these other survivors live is nothing but a bunch of homing pigeons, which take a long time to hear back with, which disappoints Daryl, who notes that his part of the deal is done since these people can help Isabel get Laurent where he needs to go, and turns his attention towards his own mission, finding a way home. He witnesses the people there treating Laurent like a messiah and even sees him comforting a recent widow whom, according to the leader there, no one else could seem to bring any comfort to in the wake of her husband's death. Meanwhile, the bad guy from the Abbey meets with Jeanne, the woman running the Pouvoir Vivre, which translates to the poor living, which itself runs the city, basically. And he says he can find Daryl for her. And she's looking for him, though I'm not entirely sure why. Anyway, she hires him for this purpose after he witnesses experiments being conducted on a walker. Isabel and Daryl visit her old place in Paris to get some items of value that he can trade for information with people that the folks they met at the cemetery can get him to. On their way out of her apartment, they run into the little girl from the series premiere that Isabel told to go back to her house and stay inside because the outbreak was starting. And she, of course, has been turned into a walker. When the girl knocks over some rotted potted plants in her attempt to reach Isabel and Daryl, it alerts walkers in the area who start falling out of windows and, I think, off the building in an attempt to reach Daryl and Isabel. And Daryl has to use one of them, a burner, which again we saw in the premiere, to burn through some vines so that he can get to a French door, in French called a fenêtre, and open it for them to escape through. Isabel expresses regret at having left the girl behind once they get to safety, as they reconnect with Laurent and Fallu, the man from the cemetery, who takes them into the French catacombs, where I also just was, which, for the record, is an extremely creepy place to be, where they meet some other survivors in an area of the catacombs that's been turned into a sort of nightclub. A young lady performs a French song there as Daryl and Isabel meet with someone who says he's heard things about boats to America, but the conversation goes bad when he demands payment before disclosing anything, and a bad fight almost starts before the club operator, Quinn, the man whose car Isabel stole, and who turns out to be Laurent's father, steps in to stop the fight. He agrees to help Isabel, and they talk, at which point he says he knows Laurent is his son, based on the fact that Isabel told him that the boy is her sister's son, which in hindsight she probably shouldn't have said. And he's pissed that she didn't tell him, which I didn't really understand because how would she have done that? Once he was born, the apocalypse was well underway, so how was she going to find him and tell him? Anyway, he wants her to tell Laurent who he is in exchange for help, but Daryl won't have it, so he makes Isabel leave, saying he doesn't need a boat that badly, which annoys Isabel because she felt he was trying to be her hero, which she says she doesn't need. Just then, as they're leaving, the bad guy shows up at the club looking for Daryl. Back at the refuge, Isabel apologizes to Daryl for being harsh, but he's decided to leave on his own to find a way back home and tells Isabel to lie to Laurent about where he went if his absence troubles Laurent, just like she's lied before to him about everything else, which Daryl says she really needs to stop doing. The bad guys show up there looking for Daryl, and he fights with the leader, almost killing him before he has to run off, but winds up falling through a rooftop. Just before the fracas, Lawrence seemed to know the bad guys were coming a moment before they burst in, causing him to tell both Daryl and Isabel that it was their fault and that he hates them, before he snuck off on his own while they were distracted by the bad guys. And now, as the episode ends, Isabel can't find him. So I really like this episode yet again, and I'm liking this show a whole lot, just like I like Dead City a whole lot, and I think the reasons are similar. This show is mainly focused on a character dynamic between two people, Daryl and Isabel. Yes, there's a lot going on around them. Yes, Laurent is part of it, but it's mostly their dynamic driving every episode of this show, and Daryl's singular mission alongside Isabel's singular mission. And every single episode furthers the plot of that one story. And I think that works a lot better than whatever the hell they were doing in the last few seasons of the main Walking Dead show. Now, in the beginning, the Walking Dead show was, of course, always multiple characters. It was driven by multiple stories happening at the same time. But somewhere along the line, I don't know, I found that to be less fulfilling than it had been in the beginning. I guess towards the end, they maybe weren't doing it as effectively as they did it in the beginning. I would have to go back and watch some of the original episodes and compare them to the later ones to sort of pinpoint it. But I think that show at the end suffered from too many irons in the fire, too many character plots going at the same time. In the beginning, the characters were all at the same level of development. And towards the end, some characters had been developed more than others. And so they felt an obligation, I think, to focus in on those characters with serious storylines. So what you got was a lot of heavy storylines focused on different characters. And then, some of those characters left the show and came back, and it was disjointed. And I don't know. The last couple of seasons of Walking Dead just were not what the show had been in the beginning. And this show, as with Dead City, seems to have made a giant correction in that each show focuses on, as I said, a much narrower set of characters and a much narrower plot line that isn't all over the place. And watching these characters take this journey, as was the case with Dead City, has just been very engrossing and thrilling and moving and thought-provoking. And I think part of the situation too is that the setting had gotten boring on the original Walking Dead show, whereas with Dead City, New York is a crazy setting for a show. It's the number 2 thing that drew me to it, alongside the fact that I love both the Negan character and the Maggie character and their dynamic. And it's working on this show. The Paris setting is very cool. Even the French countryside before they got to Paris was very cool. It was new. And seeing these characters speaking French to me is oddly compelling because I speak French to a degree. And I don't know, maybe that's not something that's going to appeal to everybody, but it works for me. But it's, even there, it's just Daryl having a language barrier and having to rely on Isabel to translate, and seeing how the French dealt with the apocalypse versus how the Americans dealt with it. And it's different. Europeans deal with things differently than Americans. The French deal with things differently than other Europeans, whatever the things may be. It's just the way it is. So seeing that is cool. And I just think this show is really good. I'm intrigued by the whole idea surrounding Laurent being a messiah, which of course he isn't, even though the show is supernatural. They've never sort of gone in that direction. So I don't think they really are in the end. It's just about the fact that he's perceived that way and is treated that way that, is an intriguing thing. Because he represents hope. The whole, theme of the show is hope lives, hope is not dead. And so he's the focal point of that. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go with that, because obviously he isn't a messiah, and they're going to have to realize that their hope can't depend on any one thing, I think, as the show goes on. But it's just a really great show to me. The whole bit about the guy who cannibalized the radio so that he could hook up the walkers to various ropes and pulleys and stick instruments inside them so that they make noise when they groan, and that he thinks of it as music, and that he's a conductor. I mean, obviously he's lost it. And, that's just, I just found that whole thing to be eerie and creepy and cool. And I don't know, I don't remember them doing anything like that on the regular Walking Dead show in a long time. I might be forgetting, but yeah, I just think this show is great. I think Norman Reedus is doing an excellent job in the lead role, which is new for him, even though he was a significant character on the original show. I think that the Isabel character is compelling because, we know that she wasn't always a nun, and we know from this episode that at one point she tried to kill herself. And, I just think it's great. Their dynamic is great. And part of that is, Daryl on the one hand wants to get on with his journey, wants to get home, but he also can't bear to leave Isabel in any real danger. Like when he thinks she's safe and with those other people, he's set to leave. But when the bad guy shows up, he runs off to draw them away because he doesn't want them to hurt Isabel or the people there. And he definitely cares about Laurent, even though maybe he's sort of pushing that down within himself because he really wants to get home. Yet we know from the preview for next week, he's going to help Isabel try to find him. So, as opposed to continuing to run off on his own journey. And that's not different for Daryl. He's always been that way, but it's just interesting to see with him in the lead being Daryl in that way. And I just really like this show. I wasn't even going to watch it. I was like, Daryl Dixon, whatever, okay. But it's really, really good. It's a really great show. And I'm looking forward to next week quite a bit, where they're going to go, it would seem, to the Eiffel Tower, which Laurent is drawn to. And of course, yes, I was there just last week, so it should be fun. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here for now. I will, of course, be back with a recap and review of next week's episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.